St. Mary's, we're looking at chapter 2. So chapter 2 is focusing a lot on Tommy in the context of Kathy H's life at Hailsham, just to remind you. So the first thing I want to talk about is how she opens this chapter. This was all a long time ago, so I might have got some of it wrong, but my memory. So again, this reminder that our narrative is retrospective. It's looking back at the past. Kathy's at the end of her caring career when she's retelling or writing this story, looking back at her past, primarily looking back at what happened at Hailsham, okay? And then this acknowledgement here that as a narrator she might be flawed, this whole idea that memories over time change. She can admit that. So she might be an unreliable narrator, but she's definitely willing to admit that to her readers. And who those readers are, we talked about in the last screencast. And my current kind of theory is that it's other clones that she's writing this for, not people outside of that sort of group. The repetition of this phrase, I don't know how it was where you were. This, like, to me, it's like breaking the fourth wall. And again, this is what, for me, led me to the fact she's speaking to the other clones, because this is the second time she's repeated it. So the first time I was like, oh, maybe. But when I saw it the second time, I was like, no, this is who it's directed at, okay? So that's what I would say about the repetition of that exact phrase there. And then we've got the mention, of this medical almost every week. So I've put this under fate. Okay, blue for hope and fate, but I think this is fate because it's the first time that their health becomes a focal point in the narrative, and I guess it's a clue for the readers. At this point, we don't know that, like, when it says donors, they're literally going to donate their organs until they can't live, until they die, but it's kind of this clue. That's why they have to have a medical every week, like they're checking that these clones are healthy, alright? And then there's this conversation about how Tommy's acting in a way that's not altogether cool. And again, I was initially, the first time I read this, a bit perplexed. I was like, why does it just keep going on to like these little things? Why is it not dealing with like these big picture issues more? But now I can see second time round that these are like the behaviours of regular teens, okay? Regular teens with social status and caring about what other people think. So again, it's emphasising their humanity. I also thought that the humanity of Kathy H came up again here, because she talks about how someone would have stopped it, like with regards to Tommy and his tantrums, and how she wished a guardian would come down. So again, it shows what is later going to make her this really empathetic carer. I want to talk a little bit about character. I think we talked last time about Ruth being quite a direct character. She's really interesting for me. She's positioned as a leader. Alright, she's quite direct, she's at times abrupt, she certainly seems to control the group that they're in, but yet at the end it seems like Kathy has come out as the leader, because it's Kathy who actually eventually had the bravery to go and see Madame. Ruth had all these ideas that she kind of talked about, but she never actually followed through anything. So I think it's interesting here that her memory is of Ruth as the leader, but as a mature clone, I suppose, it's certainly Kathy H who shows a lot more potential than Ruth, who was the natural leader. She explains the exchanges. She actually addresses the reader and gives a little context about the world at Hailsham. We start to understand here that it's not a normal boarding school, like with the exchanges, and then the fact that they don't have personal possessions, okay? So again, this is our indication it's not your regular England in the 1990s. It's something a little bit different, okay? So again, you're looking for these subtle clues, because all the author's told us is that it's England 1990s, right? So bit of a clue there. The relationships they have with each other is something Miss Hando will talk a lot to you guys about when we come to this. She's written about it in some of her notes already, but the idea for me with relationships is that they have to have these relationships with each other because there's no one else. They're completely cut off from society. So the Guardians, who we now know retrospectively, having finished the book, were trying to do the best for the clones. That's why they kind of formed these relationships and did things to, as Kathy says, bound them or bind them to each other. She interrupts her own narrative to go back and forth. So, like, she goes from her childhood to Ruth and her at the recovery centre in Dover. Again, it's interesting. We've got places that we know, such as Dover, but we don't know what a recovery centre is. There's no real explanation yet. We're kind of just left to figure it out for ourselves. We're kind of starting to piece it together. This dystopian sort of world or universe. The centre is another thing that isn't explained. We've got no context. We just know that there are centres and that Kathy liked the particular centre Ruth was in. We get more context in part 3, but at the moment, again, we're just kind of left flailing in the way. We just have to keep reading to figure out what is going on. I wanted to talk about tone. I think that's important at point. So here I've got it marked down as memory, and it's this kind of nostalgia that comes through the memories, which I think is interesting or important. We've also got memory here, and I think it's interesting that Kathy, in talking about Ruth, says she was determined to remember us all as more sophisticated than we were. So Kathy is able to acknowledge again that memories can be coloured by time and that they're not fully accurate. So this whole idea of unreliable narration or an unreliable narrator. And then we get to the change in Tommy. So Tommy becomes calmer, sort of thing. He's been teased for not for weeks or months but for years, and then suddenly he's much calmer. And again, we've got this admission that she's controlling the narrative. Tommy didn't quite put it this way, but I'm sure that's how it happened. She's taking some artistic license. Just a reminder here in terms of memory that, of course, Tommy is 13 when he's throwing these tantrums. That's like pretty old. Look, I don't know, if my year 7s, I think they're 13 or 8s, through tantrums, it would not be what you expect. So certainly Tommy stands out in this way. And then we've got the fact that we've got this development of Tommy, so the transformation or the growth of these characters becomes part of this narrative. Again, and this will come up again and again in terms of if you're looking for things that you can annotate with regards to humanity, you're thinking about empathy with regards to Kathy H and others. That's part of humanity. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't really know, like I haven't seen a lot of humanity in terms of like the ethical concerns and what is human, what isn't human, it's the little things that are humanity as well. So you notice everything, don't you, Kath, says Tommy, and she's rather perceptive. Again, this makes her a good carer. It's a human quality. Okay? These clones are experiencing the same emotions as humans, which sort of makes the argument that they should be treated the same way. Miss Lucy, of course, becomes a pretty significant guardian. She helps Tommy. She kind of believes in telling them a bit more about their fate or their future. So Miss Lucy's the one that says that, you know, Tommy doesn't have to be creative. Of course, this whole idea of creativity becomes really important later on in the narrative as they think they can get a deferral on their donations if their art shows that they're truly in love. Of course, that's not true, but it's interesting what Madame and Miss Emily say about the whole idea of the artwork is to show that they do have souls. And then my final point is just about the language here. So reproachful look. It's very British, this language, but it's also educated. It's middle class, okay? So the education that they are receiving at Hailsham. So that's chapter 2, annotations to help you out. I'm sure I haven't exhausted them, but these are the kinds of things you're looking for. Good luck doing your own.